Story 1. Got rip-roaring drunk and almost drowned in the tub. Pet bird, who should have been in his cage and covered since I was too drunk and forgot. Flew into the bathroom, sat on the sink and kept screaming. Had he not done that for about 15 minutes, I would not be here. He flew in from the living room to the bathroom. Story 2. Finding my husband face down in bed making weird sucking or snoring noises. Half seizing because he was suffering from a brain bleed post-COVID. He made a full recovery as I found him quickly and somehow picked up his 200-pound self and flipped him over so he could breathe. I've been through a lot in my life, but that takes the cake. Story 3. A suicide from the 12th floor. As a first responder, we got there, and he was still threatening to jump. But as soon as he saw some of us going inside the hotel to access his room, he jumped before verbal contact. I closed my eyes, didn't follow him, but heard the sound. Unfortunately, he fell feet first and on the grass. He didn't die right away. When we got to him, he was shattered and gurgling with exposed bones in all limbs. We knew there was nothing to do but started trauma protocol, and he failed a minute later. I can't imagine the pain he was in. To this day, I call out any workers I see working at heights without proper safety protocol. Seeing a human body shattered like that will give you newfound respect for safety and patience in your daily life. Story 4. I was 14 on a roller coaster at Universal Studios and almost fell out. Apparently, the top thing that comes down wasn't locked. Fortunately, I was in the middle seat with my 17-year-old brother on my left and a strong random man on my right. They saw my restraints start going up as the roller coaster did a nosedive. I was holding on to the bars on the seat behind me as both my brother and that stranger held the restraint down with their arms, so I didn't fall out. I'll still go on a roller coaster, but I always make sure I'm locked in now. Story 5. Watching a doctor resuscitate my 2-month-old baby, I was certain he was dead. I fell to my knees in the hallway, begging God to save him. 2 seconds later, a woman tapped me on the shoulder and told me she was a grief nurse. I thought for sure he was dead. He was intubated and airlifted to a children's hospital. Hearing a doctor tell me my 1-year-old was in critical condition after a bowel obstruction. Learning he was no longer breathing on his own and on a ventilator, his kidneys were no longer working, and his liver was starting to fail. They said that if he made it through the night, they thought he might survive. The image of him sedated on a ventilator with tubes all over him will never leave my mind. Story 6. I used to work on offshore oil rigs. The generators that power them are the size of a small house. One day, a technician forgot to lock out and tag out while he was checking why we were having voltage drops on the pump floor. A supervisor came by and saw the third generator was off and decided to fire it up. I was in the room trying to find a replacement pump sensor when it clicked. Boom, pop, zap. I saw a human explode, turn to plasma, then carbonize. The sound and smell never leave. Story 7. I was a kid in the 1980s when our school changed the medication policy such that everything was locked with the nurse. I had an asthma attack, but no one could find the nurse or the keys. I passed out and woke up intubated in the emergency room. Apparently, I almost died. The slow feeling of suffocation is terrifying. I saved a younger friend from drowning. He was in a full panic when I got to him. He almost took me out by thrusting himself upwards and pushing me way down when I wasn't expecting it. I came very close to taking in water. A riptide off Maui a couple of years later sent a friend and me out to sea quickly. We were dumb kids who didn't know ocean safety basics, like swimming parallel to the shore if caught in one. We caught the attention of the entire beach and were exhausted by the time we got the message to swim parallel. We would float on our backs, but that cast us further out. By the time we got to the shore, our legs were like jelly and didn't work, so we almost drowned near the shore after we couldn't keep our heads above the waves. We were saved by a couple of local guys who carried us in their arms to the beach, surrounded by dozens of people. Finally, there was a mass shooting at a mall where the only reason my wife and I weren't directly in front of the shooter when he opened fire was that my wife turned us around to go back into the Suncoast for some friends' DVDs. She remembered it would be a good gift for a friend. Shots went off and kept going off, with the shots and screams echoing up and down the hallways. We got locked in the Suncoast for a bit, with Christmas music playing in the background as people were getting shot and screaming. Story 8. I was a burn surgeon for a while, and I'll never forget one of my first night shifts. We were the largest burn center in the country, so we got the worst cases. When the first responders contacted us that they were bringing several patients from a house fire, we weren't too surprised. Business as usual. A family home had been burning, and a family of 6 had been inside. The mother and grandmother died on site. Firefighters couldn't rescue them. The father was over 80% burned, 3rd degree. The grandfather threw his granddaughter out of a second-story window to save her. She was okay apart from some fractures. He suffered some 2nd and 3rd degree burns but was stable besides some smoke inhalation. What I'll never forget and to this day haunts me is the screams of this child. Her yelling at the first responders, "You left my mom to die," paired with the 1,000-yard stare of a man who just lost his daughter and wife and made the decision to save his granddaughter. All of us working felt truly profound despair and fear that night. Story 9. I was surfing with friends in Nicaragua when one of them had a seizure and basically died, Baywatch style. I saw him floating in the water upside down. My other buddy and I were able to swim him to shore, but he was out cold. We thought he was dead for sure. A local performed something similar to cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but mixed with some kind of voodoo magic, and was able to revive my friend. Anyways, it was very scary believing my buddy had just drowned in front of me. Story 10. I have a few experiences to share. I lived in New Orleans where the Hard Rock Hotel collapsed right down the street. I wasn't feeling good one day, so I stayed home from classes. I heard a massive rumble and found out maybe 20 minutes later that the hotel had collapsed into the street. They had to evacuate a bus or a streetcar afterward. I don't remember which. And it was weird because I was supposed to be there that morning. No one was injured, thankfully, but it was just uncanny. The same year, I was waiting for a bus to go somewhere and normally stood on the street corner straight ahead from my apartment. The bus stopped on the corner on the other side of the street, but I was waiting on the other side for a better Wi-Fi signal. I did that every day for months, and then one day just randomly decided to wait on the right corner instead at the last minute. Not even 2 minutes after I crossed the street, some idiot rammed into the pole I had just been standing against. If I hadn't moved, I may not have heard them coming because of my headphones, and very well may have gotten hurt. I've been in a domestic violence situation where a partner refused to let me leave the house and blocked the door from my exit. I was terrified this crazy person was going to hurt me or themselves. A different partner a few years back was an alcoholic, apparently. I didn't learn that until they moved in. I got woken up about 40 times over the span of 2 hours to random political rants and then went to sleep downstairs. I got woken up maybe 30 minutes later to this person trying to build a Molotov cocktail in the kitchen. By far, however, the scariest thing was watching my mother die from cancer for a year. 8 rounds of chemotherapy had barely any effect. It took her 2 years from diagnosis to death. Her entire being changed, not just physically. She was such a lively person, always down to go party and have fun and do new experiences. She was so full of life, but the cancer just drained it out of her. She just withered away. Watching someone decline so fast and literally turn into a husk of themselves is so heartbreaking. I miss her every day. I'd rather go through anything else in life than losing someone to cancer or any other health issue. I know it's going to happen again, but I would do anything to never have to live through that again. I'd do anything for my loved ones to have their health again. Story 11. I was swimming with my niece and nephew in the wave pool. I half noticed 2 boys around 10 years old and 1 girl about 5 swim to the deep end. A few moments later, the waves started, and the boys quickly swam to the shallow end. Not really paying attention, I heard a tiny voice ask for help. Between huge waves, I saw the little girl start climbing the ladder, and the next wave knocked her into the water again. I looked at the lifeguards, and they were talking to each other, not watching the water. Another wave came, and she went under the water. Keep in mind, I'm a good swimmer, and she was in the deep end, which was too overwhelming for me to swim in. So I swam over to check on her, grabbed her elbow, and lifted her up. Then I asked her if she was okay. She said between gasping for air that she has asthma. I asked if she wanted to go back to the shallow end. Exhausted and out of breath, she just nodded her head yes. I pulled her back to knee-deep water and asked her to point out her parents. She did, and I asked if she was okay now. She said she was. Not so scary for me, but probably terrifying for her. Story 12:1. My 10-year-old daughter was choking on a tortilla chip. I tried the raise your hands method, but it didn't work. I pulled her up off the chair she was sitting in. I could see the life leaving her. She was going limp. I yelled, "She's choking." A woman ran across the restaurant, snatched her, and gave her the Heimlich maneuver. She kept choking, but the woman continued trying. Finally came out. I've never been more terrified in my life, watching my daughter's life leave her over a chip. I've since learned how to perform the Heimlich maneuver. My 14-year-old son, at the time, had just undergone a 16-hour surgery that was supposed to take 8 to 10 hours. The surgeon called and let us know everything went well for the most part, and we should go to the waiting area to wait for the post-operative team to come get us in about 30 minutes. 2 hours went by. I kept telling my husband that something was wrong. It shouldn't take this long. Our son had around 30 surgeries in his life at that point, and it doesn't usually take that long. We finally got the call. I knew when the phone rang that something wasn't right. The anesthesiologist was calling to tell us the code to get in the door. They don't call and never let you walk back there without a nurse. We got back there, and he was still completely intubated and struggling. The anesthesiologist said, "You can't stay, but we wanted you to come see him. He's not responding to our efforts to wake him up and isn't able to breathe on his own. Give him a hug and kiss and go back out to wait. We will keep you updated." I was in a haze like, "What do you mean?" I gave him a kiss, hugged his body, and told him it was time to wake up. 30 minutes later, they called and said to go back to the hotel and get some rest. There's nothing we can do sitting there. We went to the hotel, and as we were pulling in the garage, they called again and said he was moving to the intensive care unit. We went back at 6 o'clock in the morning when we were instructed. He said, "Why are you crying, Mom?" The kid had no idea what had happened. Being helpless in your child's life is something a mom should never have to feel. That pain, the gut-wrenching, stabbing feeling, like your heart is about to stop, isn't forgotten even after they pull through. Story 13. The scariest thing that I witnessed would be watching my dad accidentally slip down the stairs in our house. I was probably 10 or 11, and it was late at night. A neighbor had to come over and watch my brother and me until my parents got back from the hospital the next day. Story 14. My parents' house burned down while I was sleeping recently. We all got out, but I have never seen anything burn so fast. The feeling of true helplessness was overwhelming. The hardest part is that almost all of our family mementos burned up. My baby items, my parents' baby items, almost all our old photos, every grade school worksheet and yearbook, literally everything. I only have 3 pictures left of my grandparents that are mostly burned. It kind of hurts me. I'm afraid I'll forget one day, but I'm glad we are safe. I give up all the items I own to have those back. Story 15. Had a guy I served with put a pistol to my head and pull the trigger. Said I'd be dead if it was loaded and walked away. Also had another guy with an M16 rifle and grenade launcher attachment load a grenade, take the safety off, and point it into the control room of the submarine we were on. Still not as bad as walking into the living room as a kid and seeing my dad drunk, passed out with his hand in his pants while some low-quality VHS tape was playing. Story 16. Septic shock, cellulitis, necrosis, and needing emergency surgery. I had a breast reduction, and about a week or 2 later, I experienced an urgent and extraordinarily painful feeling in my chest. It turns out an abscess had formed and ruptured in my chest. I spoke to an advice nurse over the phone who did not think it was necessary for me to be seen right away since it was the weekend. I got in contact with my physician assistant, who ordered me to come in right away. My entire chest was as red as a tomato, cellulitis was spreading, and I had necrosis. An hour or 2 later, I was under the knife and spent a week in the hospital receiving intravenous antibiotics. My infection took days to get under control. Story 17. Stepped on the wrong spot on a sandbar along the Missouri River and instantly fell through the ground. My grandpa was there and acted quickly enough to grab my reaching hand before I was sucked completely under. I remember washing the sand out of my hair in the shower later. Story 18. I was 12 or so. I wasn't there when the small plane crashed into the only vacant lot in the area, a block from my home. An hour later, when I was home, I walked over there. The ground was broken, and there was a hole several feet deep in the ground. After the police left, I explored. There were all these little bits of plane that I picked up and a lot of reddish jelly everywhere. Took me a while to figure out what the reddish jelly was.